Good afternoon, everybody. My name is James McCoy. I serve as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Success at the Nevada System of Higher Education. We're thrilled that you're here. This is our second Math Faculty Corequisite webinar as our state and our institutions work together to bring full-scale implementation to our CoRec math work in time for the fall 2021 term. Really excited also to thank ECMC Foundation and Strong Start to Finish for their financial contributions and making sure that these webinars take place, not just as a one and done, but a variety of webinars over the course of the next several months. Very thankful also to our friends at Complete College America, who are serving as our project management team to facilitate these PD sessions. Of course, I also want to thank our math faculty co-requisite task force that have been working well over a year now into the design and implementation of our implementation action plan for co-requisite math, and certainly for their support and guidance as we've developed this webinar series for all of you. We're in store for a great treat today. We heard loud and clear from the faculty across the system whom they wanted to hear from. And so we've got a couple of dynamic speakers, both in Victoria and Joan today, that will be introduced in just a moment as we talk about co-requisite math pedagogy. For now, let me please introduce once again Dr. Brandon Protas. Brandon serves as the strategy director for Complete College America, and Nevada is one of his, I think, 11 states now at this point within the country and serving as in this role. So Brandon, we'll turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, James. For everyone, my name is Brandon Protas. I'm a strategy director here at Complete College America. And I just want to say at the forefront, we are so thrilled to be partnering with Nevada on this co-requisite support professional development series, and really partnering with Nevada in a host of different ways. So I'm just going to make a few introductory comments. I always want people to know who CCA is. We really have a singular focus, and that is on increasing college completion rates and closing institutional performance or equity gaps. While that sounds like two items, for us, we see it as a single item, because the only way we are going to really, truly, and deeply increase this college completion rates is by having a focus on equity. And the second part, which you see in our vision, is the way that we see this being done is not by changing students, but it's by holding our institutions accountable and responsible. We know that there are strategies we can implement, such as co-requisite support, that make a difference in how not only we serve our students, but the outcomes we see from our students. So we make the changes because of the work that we do as institutions. Now, this slide has a lot of information on it, but we do want you to see that Complete College America has established a set of strategies, and they're very comprehensive. In fact, we've just redone this into 4 pillars of how students experience college through purpose, momentum, structure, and support. And you'll see that co-requisite support is just one of those, and it's closely connected with many others, such as multiple measures, which we're going to be talking about tomorrow. This is a way of saying that Nevada is absolutely on the right track for saying, what are the strategies that we can do that make a difference in the lives of students? Since you're in front of a computer, I know you can all go to completecollege.org right now, and you can sign up by creating a profile. You will have access to lots of resources from Complete College America. You can connect with others, and there's a variety of things. You'll get our newsletters, things like that. So we'd love for you to become involved. Again, completecollege.org. And finally, as I mentioned, this is a whole series of professional development. My hat really goes off to the folks in Nevada and the math faculty task force, the way that they've seen this in preparing for full implementation, not saying how do we do a single professional development, but rather how do we do an entire and comprehensive series focused on a series of topics that in some ways are going to be overlapping, in some ways unique. So today, we're going to be doing a focus on co-requisite math pedagogy. Tomorrow, we're going to be focusing on methodology of gateway math placement. So you are in for a real treat. We have 2 people who've been specially selected from the Dana Center and from Citrus College/CAP, the California Acceleration Project, Joan and Victoria. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and then they are going to take it from there.
So my name is Joan Fulner. I am a course program specialist at the Charles A. Dana Center, and that tells you nothing about what I do. I primarily work in curriculum development and in professional learning. I've been at the Dana Center for about 3 years, and prior to that, I was a math professor at a community college in Vancouver, Washington, where I helped lead our co-requisite and math pathways implementation before I joined the Dana Center.
Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria Dominguez from Citrus College. Citrus College is about 20 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. And it's nice to see many of you I recognize from when you visited our campus last year. I'm currently the Dean of Mathematics and Business, although I've only been in that role for 5 months. So prior to that, I was a math faculty for 8 years. And I did a lot of work with our co-requisite remediation from the ground up. And I've taught 2 of the 3 classes that we are currently offering co-requisite with. So I'm looking forward to presenting and sharing with you.
All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk a little broadly about some of the issues of course pedagogy as part of the co-requisite development process. And then Victoria is going to talk about some of the specifics that her institution has implemented, as well as some of the more wraparound supports and the holistic side of the co-requisite pedagogy. What I really want to focus on today is digging into some of the strategies that come into choosing the content for your co-requisite support course. I know that many of you are already engaging in a backmapping process to try to identify from those broad course level outcomes that you're developing, how do you kind of get down into a more granular level of supporting students where they're at in succeeding in whichever class they're taking. And it's going to look different for each class. So we're going to talk about some strategies that you might use in the STEM pathway and in the prep courses for that, as well as some of the strategies you might use if you're looking at designing a co-req for a terminal math course for students, such as a statistics or a math for liberal arts type class. The first thing I really want to look at is an important paradigm shift that is I think, necessary for success in developing co-reqs. A lot of the developmental course sequences that we've seen historically were really based on this idea of high school remediation. What didn't students get in high school that we think they should have had, and how do we fix that? How do we make up for that? And there's a few things that are problematic about that. One of them is that a lot of our students are not going into a STEM pathway. We know that by looking at national and state and regional and institutional data. And the pathway in high school, the Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, really is based on the idea that students are then going to go into pre-calculus and then into calculus. So there's a lot of content in that series that is not necessarily going to support our students in achieving their career and academic goals. So when we switch to co-reqs, it's really important that we also make a shift to thinking about instead of high school remediation, this idea of college preparation. It might sound just like it's a wordplay, but it really is important to kind of think about not what did students not get, but really looking forward, what do we want them to get in the future? What specific skills do they need in order to be successful moving forward? And so one of the methods that I understand that you're all looking into is this idea of just-in-time support. And that really requires a lot of intentional and coherent thinking, which starts with the idea of recognizing that there might be some topics that we're used to teaching that we really like and think are cool, but they're not something that is appropriate just in time for our students. They're not something that really supports the learning that we're trying to get across in that college level class. Okay. There are also some other models around the country of co-req for, well, they call them co-reqs. I would disagree that some of them are fully formed co-reqs where it's more of a drop-in tutoring time or a homework lab kind of thing. The most successful co-req models really are those where there is a clear and explicit connection between what's happening in the support course and what's happening in the college level or parent course, so that students can really see the value immediately and why they should be attending that co-requisite course. And so, in my opinion, the model that you're implementing, the just-in-time model, is really the one that's going to lead to the greatest payoff, both in student opinion of the course and also in student success and retention through the course. So once you have decided which courses you're developing co-recs for, and you've all done that, it's really important to think about that backwards design. And so some of the key components of the just-in-time model that you're looking at, it's really important to have a set and predictable schedule in the college level course. I know that most of your institutions are working in what we call a cohort model, where students who are in the support course are in a separate section than students who were deemed college ready and who don't have the support course. But depending on fluctuations in student population, fluctuations in which models are working, you may find that you end up changing some of that. And if you are doing any sort of commingling where you have some students who are taking the support course and the college level course, and some students who are only coming in for the college level course, especially if you are looking into having different instructors, it's absolutely critical that you have a set schedule so that there's that communication and that clear alignment between the content in the two courses. If you are going to have two instructors, it's super important that they're talking to each other, because otherwise, I mean, no one wants to come into a class and ask, so what'd you guys do in class today? And then have to make things up on the fly. Certainly all of us have had that experience where we have to kind of adapt in the moment. But the more you can have that be clearly delineated, the easier it's going to be for both the instructors and the students. We're going to dig deeper into this idea of backmapping of content, which is a great tool for making sure that what's happening in the college level course is immediately supported prior to by what's happening in the support course. It's not a standalone strategy. It's really a strategy that you implement before you start teaching, but there are other things that you want to do as well for the just-in-time remediation or just-in-time instruction to kind of bolster and make sure that it's very timely for students. As I mentioned before, it's really important to focus on the topics that are actually necessary and required for student success, not necessarily those that are traditional that we're used to teaching, that we necessarily experienced as students whenever we took these courses, things that are in the textbook. A lot of times we have to step outside and really think critically about why is this being taught here and how is it serving our students. The final part of what really makes just-in-time the co-requisite model effective is using regular formative assessment strategies. Right? Just-in-time implies that you're adapting to what the students need on a just-in-time basis. We have to be checking in with them, or else we don't know what they need that just-in-time support with. So in addition to the backmapping as kind of a superstructure for what's happening in that course, that formative assessment can help make sure that you're also reaching students on a day-by-day basis if there is an unexpected misunderstanding or an unexpected deep understanding where you don't need to spend time on something. So I've already kind of addressed some of these. You've already bought into this model, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But I really want to emphasize that the most successful co-requisite courses are the ones where the students can clearly see the connection between what's happening in one part of the course and what's happening in the main course. Students don't come to class if they don't see that it's important, even if there's an attendance policy. So the more we can be explicit and very clear about this thing you're learning right now will be helpful in the next hour or the next day when you need to use it, that's really going to increase the value of this course for students. They're going to see the added value that they're getting by taking the support course. One thing that I will mention, I know that most of you, as I said, are doing a cohort model, but we've seen in a lot of the examples where students are commingled, where some students are in the support course and some are not, who are mixed together in the main parent course. We actually see that sometimes the students who are in the co-requisite course, who were deemed as underprepared during the placement policy, are turning into the leaders and the more dominant students in that college level course, because they are seeing they're being reminded of those key concepts and skills much more immediately to having to use them in the class. Right? If someone tests in to college algebra or quantitative reasoning, they may have all the skills, but some of those skills might be rusty. They may not have seen them for a year or 2 years, or they may have just kind of cobbled it together on the placement process in some way. But if the student is in the co-rec and they see it right before, it's fresh in their minds. And so they can see that connection and they can be really intentional about using it and applying it in the appropriate time. And as I mentioned, whenever we're working with students, the ability to pivot and meet them where they currently are is really valuable. Sorry, I got distracted. I just saw Jim's puppy show up. So I want to dig a little more deeply into this idea of backmapping. So when I met with the task force that's putting the COREC models together, or kind of on a statewide level, we talked about the fact that most of the institutions are using backmapping as a way to identify what's in those courses. And I want to look more deeply at kind of how this process can be modified, or what happens after you've backmapped. How do you then actually turn that into a class? What happens during the day to kind of bridge that leap? So we're not just looking at course outcomes, but we're thinking a little bit more about how do I dig in? How do I enact these policies in my class? So at its most basic, backmapping is taking the course level outcomes and figuring out what is necessary for students, what previous steps are necessary for students to achieve those outcomes. This is particularly useful in co-requisites because we're moving away from a model where we could kind of make assumptions about what students are coming into us with, right? If you pass class X, then when you come to class Y, we make some assumptions about what you already know. While we may have some assumptions that we can make based on our placement process, it's not necessarily very reliable that we can point to every single particular topic and assume that all the students are going to have them. So of course, I just always want to mention, I have never taught a class where all of my students came in with what I hoped they had come in with. There's always something that I have to make up just on the moment because people don't remember it. And so really we're just formalizing a lot of that and giving space and time for doing that catch up with our students. So we do this backmapping. One thing I'll mention is with the STEM pathway, it's very common to backmap from the college algebra class, figuring out what maybe intermediate or beginning algebra concepts you might want to put into that co-rec. It can be a valuable exercise to, instead of backmapping from college algebra or from pre-calculus, to actually go all the way up to calculus 1 and backmap from there. The STEM path has acquired many, many topics that may or may not actually have anything to do with success in calculus. And we'll actually explore this a little bit later on, but it's something to consider since you're in the process of adopting co-requisites and implementing math pathways. It's a great opportunity to look holistically at those multi-course sequences that you might have. And I'm just going to keep saying it, right? We want to focus on the topics that are needed for the college level course. And if there's something that when we're backmapping, we're like, wait, where did solving an equation with 2 quadratics go? If it doesn't show up, it doesn't show up. And we don't need to cover it. We're not looking at high school remediation, we're looking at college preparation. And so unless we can identify a place where a particular skill really is necessary, this backmapping process kind of highlights some of the fluff that we've put into our courses that is not strictly necessary for college level success. And I'm not saying that those are not useful skills. I'm not saying that they're not things that we shouldn't value. I'm saying that if somebody is going into a discipline where maybe they don't need the full algebraic breadth of knowledge, maybe there are other quantitative or data science skills or statistical skills that would better serve them in achieving their professional and educational goals, then they would be served by doing a laundry list of skills that we tend to cover in our prerequisite courses. So it's really that shift away from here's a list of things I have to do to thinking about how will we ensure success for our students, both at this class level and as they move forward. What are the things that are really going to support our students in becoming the professionals that they want to become? So as I mentioned, backmapping is a part of this process. It is kind of the design stage of coming up with a co-rec, but it's important to build capacity within your departments and within your courses for the use of formative assessment. We want to make sure that we can get a true understanding of where our students are and their level of understanding before we get to that exam and find out, oh no, turns out the things that I thought from backmapping this group of students was going to need, I was wrong. They did need all of these skills, but where they had weaknesses and strengths was not what I was anticipating. And so the way we pivot and make sure that we're meeting the individual needs of every individual group of students is by looking at formative assessment strategies. Sometimes this gives us the opportunity to skip something or to cover something in less detail than we had anticipated. And sometimes we get surprised and we realize that our students don't know something that we maybe thought of as even a prerequisite to the co-rec course, or something where it's just the communication isn't quite meshing. You know, we've said it, it hasn't landed. So we want to make sure that we have that space to reinforce those topics. We're going to talk a lot more in March about active learning and how you can use that mixed with formative assessment. One of the things I love most about active learning is that it acts as a formative assessment because students are doing math. But there are other strategies that you can also use for formative assessment that can help you make those pivots. Some of these you've probably heard of. If anyone wants more details on any of them, please feel free to email me. But these are things you might try building into the department culture, creating a library of these, actually putting them into the course design, saying, you know, when you're covering this topic, here's a formative assessment that you can use to know whether or not you can move forward. Especially as a department, the more semesters you get into this course, you're going to start to realize, you know, turns out this wasn't really an issue, but this place over here that we didn't anticipate does tend to confuse students. So let's really be mindful about, you know, shifting our attention based off of these formative assessments. So there's the muddiest point. That's an exit ticket, a special type of exit ticket where you ask students to write down what was most confusing that day. Exit tickets and entry tickets are something that are often used to show that somebody's done their homework or that they've finished a concept that day. You can use group quizzes where you're listening in to how the group is working together and looking at their performance. This next one is called number of things. There's clicker questions, concept checks. Kahoots is on cell phone app that you can use. Basically, it's a voting question that we're going to do a little bit later, so you can see an example of one of those. One of the ones that I really like that I learned at a conference is a red, yellow, green cup. So you get a bunch of solo cups in those 3 different colors, and students can put the color cup that matches their understanding at the top. So if your whole class is green, you can move on. If you've got yellows and a smatterings of red, you probably want to spend a little bit more time on that topic. If all the cups are red, you definitely need to spend a lot more time clarifying what's going on with that concept. Think, pair, share is another model where you have students think about something individually, talk to each other in a small pair group so that there's less kind of, people feel less visible and less vulnerable talking to the whole group, and then have them share out. And then one of the lovely things about being online is you do have this polling and discussion forum option, right? In a way that you can't have students necessarily in the chat box or anything like that in a face-to-face class. We can take advantage of that now in our virtual classes. So as mentioned earlier, there are some differences when we're looking at the content design between a class that is terminal and a class that's one of a series of classes in a pathway. So when we're designing a co-requisite course, that's one of the first questions we need to be asking ourselves, because it's either going to tie our hands or really free up what we're allowed to do. And you already know which of your classes are in which category, but I still just want to look a little bit more deeply at how we can use that information to frame our process. So the nice thing about terminal classes is that there's nothing that comes after them. So you have a lot of flexibility about how you get through those topics, how much time you spend on the support course, in which places and where, right? It really allows you to say, you know, if I can't find any question in this course that requires this prerequisite skill, we're just not going to cover it because I know they're not taking another math class after this. I don't have to worry about that. That being said, of course, if you've got a statistics class and a nursing major that uses it, you should talk to them before you cut anything out that's too big, right? All of these conversations should be happening in partners or in conjunction with partner discipline discussions. If you have a discipline that is using your math courses as part of their degree plan, which they all are, you should check in with them as you're going through this process. Why do they use the class that they currently use? And what is it that they expect students to get out of that? And try to make sure that you're not pulling the rug out from under them when you make these changes. As I mentioned, for the STEM pathway, it gets a bit more complicated, and we'll look at a framework for having those discussions moving forward. Oh, I've talked quickly for about 25 minutes. So I want to go ahead and actually use one of the techniques that you can actually use in your online classes as a way to check for understanding and check for consensus. I don't like talking for too long without having people participate. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do something called a chat waterfall. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little icon that says chat box. I'd like you to open that up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a prompt up on the screen, and you're going to type your answer, but not press enter until I tell you to. And once you press enter, we'll see this huge waterfall of things showing up in the chat. Any questions about the mechanics of what I'm asking you to do? Most of you have your cameras off, so I can't tell, but I'm going to go by the 4 of you whose faces I can see, and you're all giving me nods. Awesome. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to type a response to this prompt into the chat box. What are some topics that are included in the traditional prerequisite sequence that are not necessary for quantitative reasoning? And so I'm going to give you maybe a minute to type in your answer or answers. The problem with the chat box is that if you try to go from one answer to another, you press enter and then it puts everything in the chat box. So maybe use a semicolon between the things in your list instead of using enter line. All right, so we're going to put in our answers to this first question. What are some topics that are not necessary for QR? Quantitative reasoning, so whatever course you teach that is for liberal arts, or so Anne, I think you told me what it was called before, and I don't remember what you said. But there's kind of a general math for liberal arts.
Yeah, math for liberal arts, it's often called, but yeah, or quantitative reasoning should be generic too. Yeah, math 120.
Math 120.
Correct. Yep.
Yep. So that's what's framing this question: is what are some things that normally happen in a developmental math sequence or prerequisite sequence that you don't need? And let's press enter, everybody. All right, lots of stuff. Let's see here. Completing the square, solving for polynomials, rational functions, yes, synthetic division, absolute value equations, exponential growth, interesting. Factoring trinomials, polynomial long division. Oh.
That's a good
Sorry,
one.
that was out loud, wasn't it? Right, so there's lots of things that we normally would see in a Algebra 1, Algebra 2 series that students who are going into a non-STEM based field probably don't need. And so that's something we should be going into thinking about as we look at designing these courses. So we're going to do another one of these. And I want to pivot so that instead of thinking about what we don't need, I want you to think about what are things that are not normally included in the sequence leading up to this course that would be useful. So now instead of thinking through your laundry list of things that you want to cut, you're thinking, if I could, what would I put in instead? So again, you're going to have about a minute to think about these questions, and then I'll have you press enter once everyone looks like they've had a chance to finish thinking. All right, it looks like some people have stopped typing, so I'm going to have everyone press enter. Let's see here, error checking, how to use a calculator, logic, graphical representations, yeah, more about reading graphs, study skills, calculator skills, absolutely. Excel programming, a lot of those things, right? Dimensional analysis. These are things that are really useful and really valuable for students And I'd argue they're valuable for students who are going into other math courses as well. But if we're cutting out a lot of the algebraic stuff that our students don't need, it gives us some space to put in some of the other concepts that we don't normally get to have time for, because we have been more intentional about what's going into those classes. So that's one of the things I find really exciting about CoRecs, is really being able to think outside the 300-year-old box about what we teach in our math classes. Okay, so that's one of the ways that I like to think about backmapping when we talk about our non-pathway courses, or courses, they're not non-pathway, but courses that aren't part of a series of courses. I want to talk a little bit more about some strategies for the STEM path, because this tends to be a place where we're really worried about how we're going to cover everything. How do we make sure that students can be successful in their next course? There's actually some interesting articles out there about the fact that pre-calc doesn't actually increase student success or likelihood of success in calculus, which is a little bit of scary reading. If anyone wants to read that, I can send you the link, but I was taken aback the first time I read that. But I found that knowing that, I could be a little bit more creative about how to redesign the class so that I didn't feel quite so tied into it. So when I was doing this with my colleagues in Washington State, I really started with a series of 2 questions. When I was backmapping the topics, because you can backmap and make everything still show up from STEM, because it just can, right? So thinking about, are there 2 standard problems where this skill or concept is used in calculus? So the reason I ask about the standard problems is we've all got those weird questions at the end of the chapter where they're like, you're going to see this once. Someday, there's this weird strategy that you're going to use, and you'll remember this moment, right? Forget about those ones. What are the basic questions that all the students use? What are the skills there, right? So don't think about the weird ones. Think about the standard questions. So once you've asked yourself that question, ask yourself, okay, so now that I've identified this skill, how do we use it in calculus, right? I mentioned backmapping from calculus because that's really what those courses are for, right? So if you use a concept in calculus, do you use the breadth of what you teach about that concept? Or are there parts of it you're like, well, we teach this because we teach it, but actually turns out no one's ever going to use adding trig functions algebraically or graphically in my calc class. I teach it, but we're not going to do it, okay? So you ask yourself those questions. And then there's actually a couple more questions to ask yourself, right? For the skills that you already kind of gave the thumbs up on those 2, do you usually have to reteach this? And if so, probably they're not retaining it. So maybe wait to teach that skill until it itself becomes a just-in-time support for the calculus class, right? Students don't retain things for 3 or 4 semesters. We know that. And so if there are skills that we always have to reteach anyway, let's add some time into our class where we have to reteach that and plan for it, and not try to teach it in advance when we know that students aren't going to retain it. And another question is, does it show up in Calculus 1, or does it show up a lot later? Like, is this something that they're not going to need till Calc 3? Because I feel pretty confident that I would not remember a skill that I learned kind of without context in a college algebra course, being told, well, in 2 or 3 semesters, you might need this. I wouldn't remember it. And it's not surprising that many of our students don't either, right? And again, if it's something that's not going to be taught until later, then consider not teaching it until it's going to be used in that course. So there's this question in the chat about, should we make calculus a course with a co-requisite too? And I would say you certainly can. There are schools around the country that are doing that. There's not many. I think I've counted 7 of them. But there are places where, for instance, they say, our students come in algebraically ready, but they don't usually have the trig. So they develop a mini co-rec, usually it's not even the full semester, just to help the students catch up with trig. Or they say, these students are kind of on the fence. We know that with placement exams, there's what are called bubble students who are kind of just a little bit on the underside of the placement score. They would probably be fine if we just supported them a bit. So they take students who aren't very dramatically identified as underprepared, and they put them directly into calculus with support. That's another tool that we're seeing more and more of. I think we haven't seen it so much before because a lot of places started implementing co-recs for stats and quantitative reasoning because it was kind of the easier choice. And now everyone is turning their attention to the STEM path and how can they make that better? And one of the things we're starting to see is a co-rec for the calculus so that students are getting that just-in-time support there as well. Great question. So I want to just take us through kind of thinking about a couple of topics and how we feel about how they pass these questions, this framework. So I'm going to put up, I'm going to start with just one poll and we'll see kind of how long this conversation goes as far as how many of these we get through. But I'm going to start a poll here in just a moment, and I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. So for matrices and matrix operations, there's a bunch of options that are going to show up in the poll, and I want you to click as many of them as you think apply as far as this course is as far as the STEM path is concerned. So let's see here, relaunch. Right, so the options are, this is necessary for success in Calc 1. Some aspects are necessary. It's necessary for later classes. It's necessary for other disciplines that might use calculus as a prereq. It's included for historical reasons in a college algebra or pre-college algebra class. It often needs to be retaught. It's not necessary, or you're not sure, or it's not currently included in your pre-calc series. So you can vote for as many of these as you feel are true. All right, so when we look at this topic, we see that there's kind of a breadth of different feedback, right? So some of us feel that it is necessary for calculus or a later calculus or another discipline that uses those courses in its field. The majority seem to feel like it's not necessary in the pre-calc series. And that's actually what my department decided. Even before we started streamlining our sequence, we realized that we were teaching matrices in college algebra, and it was just painful for everybody, and they still didn't know any of it by the time they needed it. So that course was hugely impacted, it was hugely crowded. So we decided to just take out a couple of topics that we identified as being not necessary. Right, but this kind of thought process for that question, let's see here. I think I have time for one more. Right, so same framing, except now we're asking about synthetic division. Somewhat similar responses here, right? But again, the point of these questions is not to make a decision necessarily, but to start that discussion. In your department, if there's a difference of opinions, you should just have a talk about that topic, right? Some other topics that I was going to do, but I'm running out of time, right? The difference quotient, imaginary numbers, rationalizing a denominator, solving an equation with two radicals, different things you might do with a rational equation, right? There's lots of these topics that you might want to dig into. Why are we teaching some of these details? Or why are we teaching this at all? So very briefly, right, once you've identified the topics that you want to teach and the content, it's important to start thinking about how you're going to cover it. It turns out that contextualized mathematics leads to higher pass rates and more positive attitudes toward math. Naked math is not really going to stick with most of your students, at least not the way we usually refer to naked math, right? We really want to make sure that our math is relevant and speaks to students' context. How often have we seen our students leave their intuition and their understanding of the real world at the mathematics classroom door, right? They come in and they're like, sure, 5 million bananas, that seems legitimate for that recipe. You're like, I don't know, right? We want to make sure that we're speaking to the understanding that our students have and leveraging and building on that, as opposed to showing them things where the applications are either phony or not relevant to their lives. My favorite example is the person who has 40 coins in their pocket that's worth $3.10, and they want to know how many of them are nickels and how many of them are dimes. Well, who's going to do that with a systems of equations? You're going to pull the coins out of your pocket and count them. That's a silly application, right? We want to move toward these authentic applications that really help us speak to our students and their cultural understanding and the needs of their community and their families, because that's what really makes math real for our students. It's also really valuable to use the same context throughout the co-requisite course and into the college level course, because then it's super obvious to the students why those are aligned and why they should come to the co-req class to get that introductory information. Okay, that was a lot of information, I think, for 45 minutes. So I want to open it up for questions. I have the chat open. I have the participants window open. If you look at the participants window at the bottom, there's an option to raise your hand. If you click on that, I am happy to call on you to answer a question if you want to ask it out loud, or you can ask questions in the chat box. I do not have a model back map for Pre-Calculus 1. Largely because it varies so much based off of your local context. I taught on a quarter system, so it was completely different anyway, what we used. And it also depends on if you're keeping any prerequisite courses, how long your pre-calculus sequence might be. So at my institution, we actually had a college algebra, then a college trig, but we were on quarters. Right, so I don't have a model, but Victoria might. I don't know. I think she's about to say that. And there are other models around, and I can tell you the names of some of the people you could contact for that as well. But I do not have one. Yes, that's an excellent point about having a window into our students' perspectives. I shudder to think when I first started teaching, I wouldn't know anything about my students until we got to an exam, because I just lectured and I didn't do any sort of formative assessment. I was very traditional, and I was often flabbergasted by what did or did not happen at the end of a block of the class. And so formative assessment and having those lines of communication open are really important. I would say that kind of quote unquote soft skill incorporation into these co-req classes is as important, if not more important, than the actual mathematical content that we're using.
Joan, I have a question. Can I unmute? I tried to put it in chat.
Absolutely.
You talked a little bit about, contextualizing the math, and I agree, like, you're going to go to the store and buy trail mix and you're going to put in raisins and whatever, and nobody does that because they're all going to pick out the raisins these days, like kind of thing. So, and you talked a little bit about trying to contextualize it to where our students are at and like where they are in their lives to give it meaning. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas or articles, that really speak to some of the big picture items that are the big picture things that are going on today. Because I know there's a lot about sort of the connection of math and society and math and inequity. Ideas like that maybe some of our students could really, connect to, that might be helpful to share with faculty as they're really trying to think. Because I know the traditional math books as they're coming out now, they don't have that. But I'm sure there are people out there who are thinking about these projects and connecting math to real, and I hate the word real world problems, authentic,
Right.
I want to say real, but I almost hate that term. But
I think authentic is a great choice.
Authentic, yes, and current.
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit about the curriculum design that we use, which is we try to look for healthcare applications, civic literacy applications, whether it's voting or financial applications. Sometimes it's pretty hard to find a good application for a particular algebraic topic. I will say though that as of January, the Dana Center's materials are going to be open source. So you'll just be able to go in and look at them and see a lot of those applications. There's no like one publication out there, I would say, that has a good list, but any of the books on culturally responsive teaching give you a good framework for kind of starting to look at that. And honestly, the most powerful way to know what your students are interested in is to ask them. The first couple semesters, ask your students to tell you where they see this being used in the real world. You teach them a concept and then you say, okay, now your job is to come back with 1 or 2 ways that you could imagine this being used. And then boom, you've got applications for next semester. And then continue to ask so that you continue to get that updated feedback from your students about what their interests and what the local contexts are, right? Because what's important to students in Reno might be different than what's important to students in some other community that's more rural, right? It's going to be a different set of contexts depending on your student population. Are they older? Are they younger? That's all going to contribute to where they find the most connection. Any other questions at this point? Yeah, that's a great, Just Equations has some great articles, and they've got a conference coming up in the next few months, I think, that it's going to be really powerful. That's another thing. If you look back at old AMATIC conference or recordings or sessions, I'm involved in a task force for Math for Nurses where they have a lot of applications about dosage calculations. You don't have to be a nurse for those to be relevant, great problems for proportional reasoning and dimensional analysis, right?
So Joan, if I can just jump in real quick, this is Brandon from Complete College America, and Just Equations does do some great work. And, you know, there's some conversations about how data science can be used. When you think about equity being a topic that's talked about a lot, well, you can dive deep into that with math by saying, well, what is the data behind it? And you can look on different axes of where those inequities exist, whether it's home ownership, whether it's assets across different racial groups, and you can use those as starting points where you're not coming up with the conclusion, but you're using it as an inquiry-based activity.
Absolutely, and there's some recent publications. My copy is upstairs, or I'd tell you the exact title, but that they've just put out. It's a high school book, or it's a book about high school, but it's social justice applications, and you could borrow the lesson topics even if you didn't want to use the same type of format. I do want to mention, I referenced an article about the importance of contextualization. That's here in the slide, and the slides will be sent out to you, so you can find that. And then if you do have any questions for me in the future moving forward, or you want to follow up about any of the things I've said, you can contact me at this email address.
Thank you, Joan. So I'd like to now tell you a little bit about Corequisite course pedagogy at Citrus College. And we're again in Glendora, California, about 20 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. So here's what I'm going to cover today. I've got several items. I want to just give you a brief overview of how our courses look, what we offer in mathematics at Citrus College, talk about how our classroom looks, and then talk about some pedagogy in terms of student-centered teaching and learning, as well as supporting the affective domain. As you're going to hear so many things that I'm going to say that were referred to in Joan's presentation. We really meshed very well, I think. I'll take a break for questions right here, and then we'll talk more about pedagogy in terms of just-in-time remediation, give you an idea of a typical class day in both a pre-calculus class and also a statistics class. Finally, highlight our faculty community of practice, which is that's our gem. I would call it that because it really makes everything happen. And then I want to share with you a little bit of data and results from our classes. So this is how we looked a long time ago, prior to fall 2018, before we even started any kind of corequisite remediation. We had 4 levels of remediation of basic skills going back to arithmetic. And if someone started at arithmetic, it was very unlikely that they made it through to calculus 2. It was just the pipeline of doom is what we used to call it. So we don't have that anymore, but instead what we have is we have 6 major pathways, I would call them. We have open access. You'll notice they all say open to all students. So depending on a student's major will determine what they take. So we have for our career technical education students, we have a technical mathematics that's currently being taught in a learning community with students who are in the automotive program. We have a very popular mathematics for everyday living, which is our liberal arts math. We just started this last year and it's growing in leaps and bounds in popularity. We have our teacher preparation pathway. We have 2 courses. We offer the first one right now. We're getting ready to offer the second one, the part 2, which has more statistics and probability, probably next year because we're revamping our degree for teacher education. And then the remaining 3 here on the right, these are the Corequisite courses that we offer. So we offer introductory statistics with Corequisite support. And you can see it's a diagonal here. And the reason why is because we offer these as a linked Corequisite. They're taught in a single block of time by a single instructor. So even though the Math 065, which is the Corequisite 2 units, may end at 10 o'clock, and the transfer level course for statistics begins at 10:10, students and faculty both consider it just one single class. And it gives faculty the ability to freely go in and out of the Corequisite material to the transfer level and then back and forth. And it's very useful that way. We teach applied calculus also that way. We have a two unit applied calculus or business calculus. Calculus for business and social sciences is the real name we call it. It's the Corequisite is 2 units. Transfer level course is 4 units. And then we have our STEM pathway starting at pre-calculus. So for us, pre-calculus is the gateway into the calculus sequence. Other schools use college algebra. We have a college algebra class, which is not really doing much anymore. It used to be very popular with nursing students, but now they have to take statistics. So that's, that has kind of gone by the wayside. We have a very large unit load on pre-calculus. It is a 6 unit pre-calculus transfer level class, includes trigonometry, and then a 2 unit Corequisite. So that's 8 units, so 8 hours a week, pretty much, that students would take this class. And then following that, we do not have any Corequisites on any of our calculus courses yet. Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, and then linear algebra and differential equations. And the reason why we don't have a Corec yet on Math 190, which is Calc 1, is we're still looking to see what the results are from our pre-calculus. This is the 3rd semester we've been offering it, the pre-calculus as a Corec. And we need to give it a little bit more time, probably after spring of next year, even though we have the pandemic going on, we're going to probably evaluate that. But one thing anecdotally I can tell you is we've never had as many sections of calculus as we have now. We started with 2 a few years ago, and now we have 5, and they keep growing. And that's Calculus 1 and Calculus 2 that we're increasing. More students getting through and more students passing and getting on to the more interesting calculus work. All right. So what does learning look like in the classroom? A lot of times it looks like this. We don't want it to look like that though, because wouldn't you rather it look like this? It looks very active and inviting and questioning and just more interesting than it looks in that previous slide. I wanted to just go for a second. Oh, I'll do that in a minute. Sorry about that. I'm going to break out in a minute. We have furniture. So we have these desks. They're called Koi is the name brand of them. They named it that because it looks like a fish. And I'll show you another view of it that lets you see. And they fit together very nicely. Pods of 3, 4, 6, even or 8. I've done all of them. And they're really nice for helping students to understand that their role in the classroom is to work together, with each other. Whiteboards on all 4 walls, including portable whiteboards on walls where we cannot mount a whiteboard, like a wall with windows. PAL carts, that's right here. I'll talk about that in a second. We also have been able to purchase using grant money manipulatives for statistics, playing cards, dice, calculators, things that we can use in the classroom. The PAL cart, we have 4 of them right now. And what they allow me to do, and what all of these things allow me to do, is no longer have a front of the room or back of the room. So students can't hide. The PAL card in particular allows me to be presenting a lesson, and then at the same time on another whiteboard, maybe off to the side, we're going to see students' work. A student would bring their work up and project it using the overhead projector, the projector here, and be able to show their work. And it's really very nice. It just makes our life a little easier and also allows students to be involved in the lesson. So this was an actual picture of one of our classrooms before all of this happened. You could see very traditional. But now here's our classroom. So here's the fish, and you can see how it's it kind of looks like a fish. Well, you know that you put them together right when you see this kind of pseudo equilateral triangle here in the middle. It's transformed us, transformed our teaching, such an amazing way. We are very much into high touch and high support pedagogy. We are also employing backwards design course content, so that way we are making sure that what we teach in the Corequisite is what is actually needed for the transfer level course. Minimal lecture. We want the students to really be taking over the learning and guided by the instructor. We focus on a lot of productive struggle and get them used to that. And I'll talk about that in a minute, what I mean by getting used to it, understanding what that means. We encourage group work. Of course, that's the way our classrooms are set up, which, as Joan also mentioned, brings out leaders in the classroom. We have a couple of ways we can use those leaders. You may have heard of Uber driving or ambassador exchange. They're kind of the same thing. Uber driving is just kind of a fun way to say that when a student or a group needs help, they'll raise their hand and they'll call for an Uber. And who are the Ubers? The students who are done. So they will go and leave their pod and go and help somebody else. It takes the stigma out of asking for help by making it something fun. Ambassador exchange is another way to do this. It's kind of a twist where you actually will take one student from each pod or group and switch them with another group. And that way you have you've made kind of a new set of people working together, again, to help them with what they're working on. And this is what I want to break out for a minute. So let me just stop my screen share for just a moment. So this is from one of our classrooms, Sophia Lee's classroom. You may have met her if you visited Citrus College. It's a pre-calculus classroom. Students are very often given a problem they're not sure how to solve. They're given a problem with a very little instruction. And what do you see they're doing? They're working together. They're talking about it. They're trying things out on the board. Whiteboards are amazing. It gives a person freedom to try something and erase if it doesn't work and try something else. A piece of paper seems so permanent, but a whiteboard, it's just so flexible. So students are really liking working on the whiteboard because they understand how it's really the key to them understanding and helping with their success. Sorry, there we go. So what are some ways that we build a supportive classroom community? And you know what, Brandon, I am not seeing the chat when I...
Well, my chat was me saying I just love the diversity of the students in that calc class, which was not necessarily the point, but it was implicit, and that was great to see in a calc class.
We are a Hispanic serving institution, and we have all kinds of students. So it was representative of our college, definitely. When I was teaching, I used to love using something called group cards. And by the way, I prepared a packet, or it's a zip file, virtual, that I've emailed to Brandon, and he's going to make sure you all receive. One of the files is the group cards. We received these from Cuyamaca College in San Diego County. And to me, they're genius. You can notice they have an animal, a number, a color, and a letter, which means that I can regroup my students up to 4 times. That's a lot, but I've done it usually 2 or 3 times almost every class session that I'm there. So like Tuesday, I would regroup them 2 or 3 times during that class. Why? It resets their brain. It also helps them to work with new people. I've had it where students will say, I don't want to work with that person. They're giving me problems or they're mean to me. And I can tell them, oh, you'll be regrouped in about 10 minutes. So it also helps them build that community because they're getting to know each other, you know, as they work together. I love to use group practice quizzes. What I do is I will create a quiz. I'll create 5 versions of a quiz. So 4, actually. Yes. So the practice quiz, every student has the same version. They can work together. They have a certain amount of time. And then we will review the answers together. And then I give them a real quiz. They each have their own version. It may be a little harder than the practice quiz too, but I do allow them to work together on that quiz as well. It's again, a formative assessment. And I find that these practice quizzes really helps them understand what they need to know, you know, what's the knowledge. It puts a little pressure on them because when they get the real quiz, they see the connection. Oh, I should have remembered how to do that from my practice quiz. I also used to love to do exam redos when I was teaching because I felt that students really had a second opportunity to learn something, learn a concept that they didn't learn when they were taking the exam, or maybe they forgot it. I generally will tie that in with a visit to our tutoring center. So they have to spend 1 hour at the tutoring center and they have to redo every problem they missed on separate papers, staple it to their exam. I take pictures. I used to take pictures of every exam, every page, so I knew what was there before, you know, when I gave it back to them. And then I give them back up to 10 points. So 10 points out of 100. It's not a lot, but what it's really valuable with is that I encourage students to do this because when they do it and they did it right, they have a perfect exam to study from for the final. So it really, I think it made a difference for a lot of students. Encourage and expect group interactions from day one. Going in on day one and doing all kinds of things, doing an activity with them. I have a syllabus scavenger hunt that I will share with you that's in the zip file. That they are expected to work together. There's no questioning, you know. Wean them off of asking you, because often they're going to be, hands will be raised, teacher, or help me. And then I will just come back and say, well, did you talk to your group? And then they say, no, go ahead and talk to them, see what they think. Doing that often, nicely, will help them understand the power of their group that they have to answer their own questions. We use also think, pair, share with a little twist of you can make it a square if you put together 2 pairs. And I do that often because it's a low stakes. They don't have to talk to the whole class. They only are talking to a few people at a time.
Victoria, you have a question, if you don't mind, real quick.
Absolutely.
Alok, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, Victoria, I'm loving this. How do you, or what kind of software do you use if we have to do the same thing in an online environment?
So we're using Zoom with breakout rooms, and it's not perfect, I tell you, but it is still possible to do that, to use group quizzes. You know, you would hand out the quiz through, like I gave you an assignment, or I gave you the file, I loaded the course outline. You can upload the quiz to everybody, and then you can email, if you need to, the real quiz, or you can have them take the real quiz. We use Canvas. So you can actually have them take the actual quiz outside of class, and it would show up as a Canvas assignment. So each student would get a different version.
Anybody else uses anything else besides Zoom for a group activity?
You know, we have Microsoft Teams, and I don't believe any of my faculty are using it yet. But I think that's going to change next year because it's very, there's a lot in Teams. Teams is adding breakout rooms, I heard, by the end of this year too. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
And then just the note in the chat that Joan put is using Google Doc for a group quiz as well.
Victoria,
have,
can I ask you a question about the video?
Yes.
The video, it looked like that the lecture component or instructional piece of the lesson was already delivered. Is that true? Because it looked like people were just grappling to solve some problems on the board. So I'm curious about when the lecture took place and how long was the lecture?
So for that one, that was actually the lecture had not taken place, but they had done enough prerequisite work so that they understood, kind of got the idea of what to do. Lectures are, we try to limit them 20 to 30 minutes because more than that, it's just students, we're talking at them. We want to make sure that we try to implement like a little bit of lecture and then opportunities for the student to be working. And sometimes what faculty will do as well is, you know, they'll teach something on the prior day and then bring them up to the board the next day immediately to practice what they were learning as a refresher, kind of like a icebreaker at the beginning of class.
I see. So did you have to, again, I'm just curious about this. This is a wonderful teaching model, but did you have to cut out material, content material that you thought that it was unnecessary for Calc 1 in order for this model to work? Because when I look at this model, it's wonderful. But because we have to, in our Calc 1, for example, we have to cover 34, 35 sections. So that the lecture piece of that, incorporating that with all these activities where people are just grappling with problems, I don't know how much time somebody would have to implement this strategy, unless, of course, they do something such as flipped classroom. That could potentially make this work definitely.
And that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of the techniques that more of our faculty have started to do in this remote environment because we're completely remote. We're not on campus right now. And so flipped learning where they are watching a video prior to class and then coming in with basic knowledge that they may have like taken a mini quiz or had to complete a worksheet based on the video. And yes, but we are not removing any of the calculus ideas, but thinking about it in a different way. What could students do at the board and help them learn the content? It seems like it's not possible. Like, how can they do something they don't know about? But yet it is. If you've given them enough material up front that they learn it, and a well-designed lesson, let me say it that way, lesson in the sense of what the students are going to do at the board. You don't just throw them up at the board because then they get frustrated. We don't want that. We want them to be guided by you through what your directions as to what they should do. I hope I'm making this clear. It's kind of tricky, but really you're designing it so that their learning is happening while they're working at the board. So instead of you lecturing, that discovery is happening.
And I will say, this is Brandon from Complete College America just jumping in, is that in March, we're going to have an entire session led by both Victoria and Joan just on active learning techniques. So I'd really encourage you to tune in for that because we'll have a full 2 hours with our esteemed presenters just on that.
Thank you, Victoria, for that response. And I have, because of the pandemic, I have been developing some videos. It was really nice to hear you say that your faculty are using that in conjunction with a flipped classroom. I was thinking about it, and it's nice to hear that it actually works, and people have started doing that.
And you know, another thing we've started to do that we didn't have any hybrid courses before. So a hybrid class is 50%, you know, in the classroom and 50% online. Well, now we're starting to have quite a few hybrid courses where it's 50% in Zoom and 50% online. So again, to pair up with that flipped classroom idea, there's less face-to-face in Zoom because of Zoom fatigue, you know, that faculty are finding that's so real, but yet designing materials and content for the students to go through before those face-to-face opportunity idea or days that were there. So that way those opportunities present themselves that students can show what they learned when they weren't together.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And just one more final plug is we also have a different date in March on online instruction in the co-requisite course. So you'll see that with the professional development, we're going to have layers and layers of interacting or interwoven topics. So be sure to tune in for both of those.
So one other thing that's so important is the affective domain in this teaching, because students come into these classes, whether it's statistics or even math for everyday living or liberal arts course or even pre-calculus, they have a lot of math anxiety. So we make a definite effort the first 3 to 4 weeks of class to also build in some activities that have to do with growth mindset, that have to do with productive struggle, to help students understand that struggling in math is not a bad thing. It's what we want them to do, because often students will, it's been so easy, math has been very easy for them, and then they hit a wall at a certain point and they think, what's wrong with me if I don't get it right away? And there's nothing wrong with them. We want them to believe in themselves. They have the capacity to do this transfer level work. And that's what applying and pairing the co-requisite does for students. It gives them that self-knowledge or what can I say, that capacity that they know they can do it. They come to that idea that, oh, I'm doing it, and I never thought I could. So as I mentioned earlier about the productive struggle that's at the whiteboard often is we choose those lesson problems that are challenging, but yet they don't frustrate. So once again, if I'm going to give a problem to the student to work on, it may be a little bit beyond what they think they know, but if they thought about it enough, they could do it. And that's the thing. And I'm around, you know, as I walk around to every group, I don't volunteer to help, but if they're really, really stuck, I might bring another student to help, or I might give them a hint. Okay. And again, that's what I heard about the time. That's always it's hard, you know, but if you build in and provide for that struggle time, that time at the board, it pays off big time because students understand the concepts so much deeper, especially when they explain their work. Often what I'll do for like an exam review is I'll give like each of the 12 groups a problem and different problem. And then I'll mix it up so that another group has to explain the work of a group that did problem 1, for example, so that they're responsible and they have to understand, you know, everything going on. They're responsible for everything going on in the classroom. I encourage help-seeking behavior, especially when it's amongst their peers, because it's really important, again, for them to work together. I have several activities that we do during week 1. They're really short. They're videos. I'm going to show you one, just a snippet of one right now. And let me grab that. Here it is. It's just very short. Can you hear the music?
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something?
That's enough of that. You can watch the rest because I provided you the QR code and the link. Now, what is that all about? That students get stuck on the escalator when they think they can't do something. You know, they hit a wall, they think there's a wall there, and they can do it, but they have to be convinced sometimes. So we've also got some videos. Michael Jordan's a really good one. There's a couple videos on failure, you know, and maybe it's my fault, and also famous failures, Einstein, all the failures that he had. How you can have failures, but yet don't let it stop you from achieving your goal. There's always another way. These are very definitely related to growth mindset, because finding the way around problems is one of the main tenets of having a growth mindset. Other things that are, again, included in the zip file that I provided, I love to give during week 1 an educational autobiography. I'll give this on day 1 and I give it as a homework assignment. I basically want to know, what is a student's math background? What kind of, not the classes that they took, but how did they go? And you'll be amazed by what you'll learn about your students just by asking a couple of questions. Because more often than not, students will have negative experiences in math. So it's good for you to hear that. But then the last question I also ask them is, what's different about this class? How do you think it will go? And they're very, very, hopeful that this class will be different. And a lot of them will say, I already see it's different. It looks different. So I'm expecting it to be different. I mentioned a syllabus scavenger hunt, so that way we don't have to spend a lot of time going through and reading the syllabus, letting them look through it and find things. And I'll ask them about a few of them. For example, where to find the class schedule. That's an important one. What's my email address? That's another one. Things like that. We also have a campus scavenger hunt that we're not doing right now, but when we get back to campus, on campus, asking them to go, I put them into random groups and they have about a week to do this, and to find different things on campus, whether it's the student health center, the library, the cafeteria, the counseling office, my office, things like that, so that students who are usually brand new to college, they can find things. Brand new to college, or they may even be returning after a break. We have a growth mindset activity that I use as a gallery walk. And that's where I have each group read a piece of an article by Carol Dweck. She's a researcher from Stanford University, called Brainology. Each group reads a piece of it. They basically will write on the boards, I have 12 groups, just a summary of their reading. And then I ask them a question to answer about it. Each group has to nominate one person, or I might choose one person to be the spokesperson. And then I have everybody in the class split up and go from group to group to group, and they learn about Brainology that way. They learn about the whole thing. And finally, there's an article called Let Learners Struggle. This we also received from Cuyamaca College, and it's just helps them understand the benefits and the necessity for productive struggle. Another thing we have in our classes is we have our STEM counselor comes in during the first, I think it's actually weeks 3 and 4, comes to our classrooms and gives a time management seminar. And they do things with pebbles, rocks, pebbles, and sand. There's a video you can look for that's called that, just to help them understand how to manage their time better. And it's very good. I want to break right now for questions that you might have. Question, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it was your first or second slide where you put 6 courses on top, I think 6 pathway courses, or
Mhm.
or I do not know what you call them. The first 3 where there was no prerequisite, I noticed those courses were what, 5 credit?
They are, yes. They didn't have a
And
co-requisite because we decided they used to be 4 units, and now we changed them to 5. So therefore, we've still embedded time into the class for co-requisite material to be taught, even though they don't have an actual paired co-requisite.
so theoretically, you have 6 co-requisite courses. You are just calling 3 of them because there you are explicitly requiring co-requisite material taught, and the other 3, it is just embedded through the time that instructor spends with the students.
That is correct. Math 160, for example, is our newest course. We may eventually want to put a co-requisite on that, or our Calculus 1. Again, we're still I feel like we're still new at this, even though this is our 3rd year doing it. It's just because you need to give time to see how the students do with what you've done.
Is there any difference in the data between stretch model courses and co-requisite model courses? Uh, because for all practical purposes, you can do the same thing with co-requisite model classes.
You
It
can.
doesn't have to be co-requisite mentioned. They can be just as stretch courses, as we have been experimenting with it for a few semesters at CSN. Uh,
Yes.
do you, anybody knows any data that makes a difference between the two, or can shed any light between just making a class stretch or versus co-requisite?
I can tell you one thing that it's not about the data, but notice that the 3 co-requisite classes here, they have 2 different colors. It's because we needed a separate co-requisite that was 2 units that was not degree applicable. So it's coded as basic skills. For the STEM students, that was really necessary. They were the ones who really needed that because they didn't need another 2 units of transfer level or degree applicable units. They have so many already that they're transferring. So that is the main reason why we decided to split these up. These 2 units, sorry about that. These 2 units were basic skills coded. And as for your other question, I don't know the answer about the stretch model versus the co-requisite model. I'm not sure.
If you don't mind, I can speak to that a little bit.
Yes.
So the data is showing that just from a structural standpoint so far, the stretch model tends to have a lower throughput rate than the co-requisite because there's that transition point in the middle. Anytime you have a chance where students have to re-enroll and come back, it tends to decrease the success rates. In fact, anytime co-requisites are implemented, it automatically increases success rates because of losing 1 or more exit points. A lot of I worked with a bunch of California State University schools over the past year, and a lot of them that started with the stretch model have moved into a co-requisite model because they're realizing that the stretch model in effect ended up creating just another prerequisite model. It just wasn't called that anymore. And so they weren't seeing the impact that they wanted to see, even though it was no longer labeled the same way.
I will also add, Joan, this is Brandon from Complete College America, that it's very easy to teach a stretch model in the same traditional way, but just saying, well, I'm spending more time doing it. Where when you look at co-requisite, not just compared to prerequisite, but even co-requisite compared to just the parent course alone, is really a different pedagogical approach.
That's a really good point too, Brandon, because although all of our classes are taught using the co-requisite idea, but a faculty may think that they can just lecture the whole time in this Math 160, which wouldn't be effective at all. We would not want them to do that. We want all our courses now taught with this co-requisite model because we know it's effective. So let's continue on with just-in-time remediation. So let me give you just a really quick idea of what we do. So intermediate algebra was the prerequisite for all of our transfer level courses. But as Joan said in her presentation, not all the concepts are needed. For example, for statistics, if we were covering probability in introductory statistics, fraction operations are pretty much the remediation that's needed for probability. If it's applied calculus, we're talking about rate of change. Well, fractions, of course, but also linear equations in slope-intercept form would be something that the students need to understand before talking about rate of change. And pre-calculus, graphing conic sections, well, what do they need before that is to understand graphing polynomials, and in particular quadratics, of course. Backward design is something that you should really consider because this really does help to transform your class. Starting instead of with definitions and theorems and then going on to drills and going on to applications, which is, if you look at any textbook, that's how they're designed. Instead, start with an application problem. Joan also mentioned this as well. Start with something that makes sense to students, that's, has some context to it. Contextualized learning is really the way to grab students and help them understand and get that deeper learning. We do a few drill problems after that, very few though. And then at the end, if there's additional definitions or theorems, that would be covered. So before, this is a section 1.8, this is from an actual textbook. You can see they start with basic concepts, then they talk about the absolute value equations, inequalities, special cases, the drill, and it looks pretty much like what we've seen. But instead, why don't we start with using absolute value to model birth weights? Find the baby birth weights that correspond to this absolute value inequality, making it contextual, And then you can do some more problems that are a little bit more drill, just working with them. But starting with those types of examples really does help students to understand what's going on. So a typical class day, let me start with introductory statistics. So our class day, including the corequisite, the whole package, the corequisite is paired with the transfer level class. We have a single cohort of students. So a student who's taking that transfer level class is also enrolling in the corequisite, just to let you know. And I used to use these name tags. And then I put the group card on the back of the sleeve. And why? So easy to take roll. When in 10 minutes, I can see which desks have no person there and I pick up the name tags. I used to take a picture of the name tags and there's my roll. I could transfer it later on to my roll sheet. We have class sets of the TI calculators for statistics, and students bring a student ID and they can get those. One thing we've been able to do this semester and summer also under the pandemic is we've actually loaned out these textbooks and calculators to students. We've had a drive-up distribution at Citrus College where students would bring their student ID, sign a contract that they will bring back the materials and use them during their class, for their classes. It's been really good. Students have been very grateful that we've been able to do it, and I've been very happy that it worked out because student access to campus is non-existent right now. So they can, borrow these, and we were using those class sets to distribute to students right now. Usually I would do an introduction or a review from prior class day board work. Again, a 30-minute lecture at the most when introducing a new concept, and then they get up to the board and they're practicing group work. They might have a activity. We have a lot of statistics activities. Feel free to contact me if you want any of those, because I'm happy to share them. We have in some classes an embedded tutor that also helps me when we're on the ground, wander around and see what students are doing in their groups. and encourage them to stay together on task, maybe use an ambassador exchange. And then I switch up the groups. I said 1 to 2 more times, but it's more like 2 to 3 every class. I found that I was afraid to do that at first because I thought it would take so much time. But yet, the more I did it, the better they got at it. And it was just quick. After a week or two, they were really quick at going to their new desk and joining their new group. It took hardly any time at all. I might have students start homework if I have some time. Another thing I often give is 1-minute text breaks. I don't want that phone to be a barrier. And I also know that sometimes students may need to check their phone. So give them a minute. A minute's not a long time, and they can check really fast. You'll count down the time. They can text all they want, and then they're more likely to put it away. Classroom activities, and again, group quizzes. Pre-calculus is longer because, again, it's 8 units. It's 4-hour, 5-minute classes with the Corequisite included. And traditionally, it might have been lecture. Can you imagine lecturing, sitting in a lecture for 4 hours, 5 minutes? That's too long. You might want to give a quiz and then give a lecture and then worksheets, but instead think of it as active learning. And again, I'll talk with you more about this in March, about other ways to promote active learning. You can see doing a think, pair, share, then a quiz and review with that. A whiteboard session, 360-degree whiteboard session, you saw the video, and using guided class notes in groups. Our faculty have a community of practice. It's bi-weekly and it's paid. It gives faculty the opportunity to do a lot of important things. We've wrote for several of our courses a Corequisite workbook, and they've been able to design that basically using that backmapping idea. Also being able to talk about classroom issues, supporting each other, brainstorming ideas and solutions. It's a great training ground for new instructors. When I was teaching stats for the first time, I had a brand new instructor who was in my classroom as actually an embedded tutor. I think I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I'll tell you, he was instrumental in trying out things after we'd talk about them. When he was in my classroom as an embedded tutor, I'd do an activity and I'd say, oh, that really is terrible. What can we do to fix it? And then he would go in his class, when he taught his class, try it there, and we'd be able to make like on-the-fly tweaks to activities. It was really nice. I'll talk about that more in a second. Sorry, there we go. It really, let's see. We also had community practice. They were able to visit each other's classrooms. They felt safe with each other, that they felt that if this instructor was coming into my classroom to watch me teach, they would give me constructive feedback. And all of our faculty felt that way. How do you get better except to have someone, watch you and see give you suggestions. Again, we use adjunct faculty as embedded tutors. This is Sarah. She's one of our adjunct faculty, but also an embedded tutor in this classroom. It gives them continuous professional development because they're involved in our department. Because of the fact that they're embedded tutors, they get to know more of the full-time faculty. They help. It's so helpful to have an embedded tutor in the class. And again, as I mentioned with another instructor named Kevin, we made on-the-spot lesson changes because we had like 2 classrooms, one to try something and then one to fix it and try it again. So it was really excellent. Finally, I want to tell you about some data and results. All right, so starting in fall 2015, the 3 colors, the gray is basic skills, and these are the the percentage of courses that are basic skills. The percentage that are college level, for us, that's like an intermediate algebra level. And then the percentage that are blue that are transfer level. And you could see we went from pretty much mostly, even basic skills and transfer level, over 30% basic skills and 26% college level, to fall 20 where we have 90% of our classes now are at transfer level. Our basic skills have shrunk. We have one class, which is pre-stats, and students are not placed there. In California, we're not allowed to place students at a pre-collegiate level. So they are not placed there. They take it on their own if they feel the need to, but students have a higher chance of succeeding in a co-requisite course than taking a basic skills class before a transfer level. So therefore, that's why we're not offering them anymore. We have about 9% college level, still 9% intermediate algebra, but I see in the next year, I'm going to actually make a point of offering fewer sections for the same reason as the fact that we don't want basic students in basic skills. They don't need to be in intermediate algebra. They need to be in that transfer level course with support. And here's our completion rate. And this is all our transfer level math. We had a dismal 19% in fall 2015 to spring 2016. This was not uncommon. Most schools had, they were lucky if they had double digits. And now this was last year, fall 19 to spring 20. We were hopeful that it would go up this year. We were expecting over 60% in 20 to 21, but with the pandemic, I'm not sure we're going to see that. But we have seen such a tremendous improvement. This was where we started to implement our stats with support. So you saw such a great jump from fall 2017, spring 18 to fall 18, spring 19. So I wanted to tell you about our 3 courses. So we have Math 162, which is our calculus for business and social sciences. We offered 2 sections, and this was fall, everything's fall 2019, so last fall. We offered 2 sections of straight calculus for business and social sciences. We offered 3 sections with support. And we had about the same number of students in both. And the success rate wasn't that far off. I think if we had had more sections, we might have seen an even higher success rate, but it really wasn't bad. Almost 70% of the students passed. I mean, how can we can't say anything about that. We were very happy with that. Enrollment though is about 2.3 times greater starting from 2015 to 2019, enrollment in this class. And completion, 2.7 times greater going back to 2015.
Victoria, there's a quick question in the chat. When you're saying success, could you please define that?
It's passing the course with an A, B, or C, and they have to complete the co-requisite course because they're separate with a pass. The 2-unit co-requisite is a pass-fail class, and then the transfer level traditional letter grade.
And one more point, Victoria, this is Brandon editorializing, but on your last slide, if you don't mind going back to that, those are amazing results, but when you say the 76 to 69%, really the comparison is not the with co-requisite to without co-requisite. What you're really saying is those who are in co-requisite, you would compare it to what is that pass rate if they were taking prerequisite traditional remediation, which was a much lower pass rate. So this is amazing as is, but when you think about the apples to apples, it's even better.
Because if someone started at arithmetic, they had to get 4 levels to intermediate algebra and then get to the business and social sciences calculus. They never got there. And it was multiplicative, as CAP has always told us.
And one more question from the chat. Are
Yes.
you doing pass-fail grades dependent on the success in the transfer class or separate?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure, for the co-rec class, it's
Yes.
one question, but it's really 2. Are you doing pass-fail? And
Yes.
then is it dependent on success in the transfer class or separate?
No, actually, it depends on the class. The pre-calculus does have some content that counts toward the grade in the co-requisite. Statistics and applied calculus actually have workbooks. So their co-requisite grade is based on the material that students complete in the workbook.
And I will say, just for all of the Nevada folks, is there are different models in different parts of the country. And we will have, I feel like I'm plugging everything, but there will be an upcoming session where we're going to try to address that.
Here's our statistics. You can see it's our most popular class at Citrus College. We had straight statistics without support, 22 sections, and we had statistics with support, 23 sections. And we saw a higher success rate, 64% with the support, about the same number of students. And once again, we're very happy with this number because it would have been in the teens if students had had to start at arithmetic or pre-algebra. 1.9 times greater is our enrollment. You can see it jumped from 864 students taking statistics to 1,625 students. And then completion is almost 2.2 times greater, where 457 students completed in fall 2015. We had almost 1,000 complete in fall 2019. That's the other thing. Corequisite support is helping students stay. They're not leaving. The persistence is improving. And here's pre-calculus. So we had 8 sections of our straight pre-calculus 6-unit class. We had 7 sections in fall 2019 of our pre-calculus with support. And we had a higher success rate also here, few more students taking pre-calculus with support. We're finding that students are liking the support classes. They're taking them, even if they did place directly into a straight pre-calculus class. Often they want that support. They'll take the extra 2 units. And by the way, just a quick note on how students are placed at Citrus College, 3 pieces of information: their high school GPA, their last math class they took, and the grade they earned in that class. Students that are not right out of high school would need to go see a counselor to determine the best course for them. And I see there's a Patrick Villa, you have a question?
I typed in there, I wasn't sure if you guys saw it. I was wondering, okay, I think I'm getting it right, but I don't know. In order to pass, they have to pass both halves, you know, the remedial or the correct part along with the transferable part. But what happens if they pass the, you know, the liberal arts math, but they don't pass the correct? Are they not getting a passing grade? Do they have to take the whole combo together again?
So if a student places into straight math 175, this is for pre-calculus, and yet they choose to take the support with it, if they for some reason passed 175 and failed 075, they would still be able to move on to calculus because their placement was at the 175 level. If they don't pass the transfer level and they pass the prereq, or the corec, they have to take both again because we don't offer them separately. They are linked.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Almost done. We've seen great enrollment and completion numbers. Also, enrollment in pre-cal is about 2.5 times greater. We used to have 184 students enrolling, and now we have 468, helping our STEM pathway so much more now than it ever did before. And completion, almost 1.9 times greater. 133 students completed in 2015 and 251 completed in 2019. It's been my pleasure, and I'm very willing to answer more questions if you have them.
Victoria, before we go to questions, I just want to make a couple announcements because in case people peel off, we will take questions. So I want to remind everyone, please, afterwards, someone from NSHE is going to be sending out some evaluation surveys. That's really important feedback. We've made them short and quick, so if you could take a couple minutes to do that, you should be getting it through your email later this week. And of course, if you haven't already, please sign up. We are having our next session, which is on multiple measures placement, and that is tomorrow. It's going to be with Elizabeth Barnett, and she's bringing a panel of folks. She is from the Community College Research Center, CCRC. She's done some really amazing research into that. So it's not too late. You can still sign up for that. And I see there's a question about placement that's going to be talked about tomorrow. I just want to make those quick announcements, and also to say, Joan and Victoria, this has been truly amazing how well you've complemented each other, but let's open it up for some questions.
Victoria, the workbook that you mentioned that goes along with the co-requisite piece, was that developed internally at Citrus College, or was it purchased from a publisher?
So for applied calculus, we created a workbook from scratch at Citrus College. For statistics, we started with a publisher workbook and we didn't like it. We didn't like the way they covered the material. We didn't like with the content. And so that work group, that community of practice actually has been writing their own. So they're going to start using that. And the nice thing about writing our own is that we have more flexibility. You can give it to the students for free. We all use, half of our stats faculty use MyOpenMath, and therefore there's a completely free solution for students, no charge for the online homework as well as for the workbook.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So I see a question, do you use any other tools like software/assessment tools other than Zoom and remote teaching? So most faculty use online homework. And as I mentioned, MyOpenMath is a really a nice one. We use that one also in applied calculus. And then there's other paid online homework systems, Pearson, MyMathLab, MyStatLab that some faculty use. We have several options for faculty. Academic freedom, we allow them to choose the solution that they wish.
Victoria, I'm jumping in. I got a private chat asking if we'll be sending out the recordings. And so they will be published onto a YouTube site and sent out broadly. And I can tell from all of the questions that you're going to want to send this to colleagues who were unable to make it. So the link will be shared afterwards. Patrick, you can unmute if you have another question.
Okay, thank you. I'm reading, Joan kind of responded to mine, but I'm not sure. I was asking about the high school GPA because that's something that comes up all the time. That's pretty much impossible down in Southern Nevada based on many factors here. But I've heard this in other places where they talk about high school GPA. My question was about why isn't it just math? Because I mean, I look at it as, maybe I'm thinking extreme, but if somebody just took a bunch of shop classes, art classes, fun, easy classes, and they get a 4.0, that doesn't mean that they're ready for pre-calc or calc. And that's why I'm kind of curious. You know, I don't like using high school at all as a placement, but if you are going to have to use it, I'm just kind of stuck on why it's not just the math you took in high school. And I see Joan said something about the persistence, and I just was curious if that was the same kind of answer you guys had there, if that was the only, you know, the main important factor that made you guys pick that.
There's actually we use three measures. So we use the high school GPA, but also the last math class students took and the grade they earned. So a student who took Algebra 2, they could get into, could be placed at pre-calculus level if they had a high enough GPA in that course. It's kind of a complicated flow chart.
Okay, so it's all three, not one or the other or the other. It's not a pick one, pick your best.
No,
kind of thing.
It is all three. But keep in mind though, that any student can walk in off the street and take pre-calculus with support.
Yeah.
Because it's open to all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Patrick, again, I will say this can differ in different places across the country. So we will get into it more tomorrow. And it's often used for not which math course, but rather, do you take the math course without support or do you take the math course with support? Where there's other advising that would go into which is the correct track for your career and academic goals.
So Victoria, at Citrus College, do they not use any placement? It's either you have a high school measure or not.
We used to have more complicated placement. We used to have an assessment test, AccuPlacer, which was not accurate. Yeah. So we had abandoned that. And now we use these three measures to determine student placement.
And what is there a gap on that? Or does the measure out of high school have to be immediately out of high school? Or so what if a student took a gap year? Do you still accept that high school? Is there a time limit?
It's valid for up to 10 years. So with the exception of students who may leave college and then come back, in that case, then we would not place them using these methods. We would have them talk to a counselor.
Okay.
I had one other. legislated by the state of California that you can't use a placement test anymore.
Right.
And there's data showing the efficacy of the high school GPA for up to 10 years as even self-reported GPA as being an accurate predictor.
And just so you know, that work is by John Hetz. And then what's interesting is self-reported GPA. There's studies both by College Board and ACT. Oddly enough, you wouldn't think them, but who show that self-report is generally pretty accurate from students.
Do you have the language of that? That was a legislative action that colleges
in
no longer-
California? Yeah, it's so there's two. There's Executive Order 1110. That's at the Chancellor's office level, and then there's what does AB stand for?
It's
Victoria?
AB.
Oh,
It's
it's
Assembly
AB
Bill
705.
705.
AB 705.
Assembly bill.
I would say that
It's
AB
in
705.
AB. Okay.
AB 705 has probably more of the language that you're looking for, or at least I find it a little bit more straightforward than the Executive Order 1110. And if you just type in Assembly Bill 705, I think it's the first Google hit will give you a summary, but it's an official summary that also links to the official bill, but the summary gives you the language that you're looking for.
Appreciate it. Sorry to get into the weeds there. I had another question about financial aid. We've run into this sort of kind of ethical decision here to discuss, you know, if we have a class with support and a student ends up not passing both, that they are then not eligible because that could be more than 67% of the credits that they're taking that semester. And then they're not eligible for financial aid. Did you guys grapple with this when deciding on the number of credits total or whether to link those grades?
Oh yes, we certainly did, because like you said, it's a lot of units. It was hard for us to think about because we had separate pre-calculus and trigonometry classes, but we decided to make a 4-unit pre-calculus course into a 6-unit with the trig embedded into it because it made more sense. Are students suffering because of this? There have been a few that we have at Citrus College that students can take a course 3 times. So are they not getting financial aid the second semester? I believe they are still. I believe they are. That's something I would need to check.
So we are actually beyond time. I can't tell you how great this has been for really laying the foundation that's needed for Nevada and how well the two of you have complemented each other. So I want to give a big thanks to Joan and to Victoria. Maybe you can do some clapping so they can see that from all the other folks. Again, please fill out the evaluations. That is important. Tune in tomorrow. I know there was a lot of questions on placement, so we're going to hear from one of the topmost researchers on placement, who also has experience with CoRec from CCRC. And then there will be a whole list of topics that we'll continue in February, March, and April. So thank you so much, everyone.